Hey adventurers, so today is something that I've already done, but also something kind of new, and that's I'm doing 2 book reviews in one video. This is for Mariel of Redwall and for the Bellmaker. They're both in the Redwall series, and the Bellmaker is the direct sequel to Mariel of Redwall. And so I felt like it was kind of a good idea to, rather than have 2 separate videos where I then go rehash all the same characters and everything that I've already done, I might as well just stick them together into one review so that I can maybe keep my thoughts a little bit more coherent. So, I will be starting off with Mariel of Redwall. This is, again, a tale from Redwall, and it is by Brian Jacques. The genre is anthropomorphic fantasy or high fantasy, both, and it is a middle grade to young adult, more on the young adult side. While I was writing this video, I found out something that I didn't know, and it was kind of an interesting fact, and that was Mariel of Redwall was the 4th published book in the Redwall series. The first would have been Redwall, the second probably Martin the Warrior, and the third probably Mossflower. I'm not positive about that, but I think so. Alright, so for the review itself, I will of course be following our outline that we use for all of them, that is based off of our 5 elements of story video, which is, I don't know, I'll have it linked up here. Starting off is characters. The main characters of this, there's, again, as with all Redwall books, there's more than one main character, and most of the side characters are also main characters. But I narrowed it down to really 4 main characters in this one. That is Mariel, who is a mouse, Dandin, who is a mouse, Ronblade, who is a badger, he's the Badger Lord of Salamandastron, and then Gabool, the Wild, who is a sea rat. Basically a rat that lives on the sea, is a pirate, basically. So, Mariel is... Mariel's a pretty spirited character with lots of spunk, I guess. She has a lot of drive to achieve the goal that she is working towards. She's a very interesting character, and one that's fun to follow, and one that I actually really enjoy as a character. Dandin is very similar in that he's very exciting and very happy and fun and just really wants to achieve the goal that he's working towards. And Dandin and Mariel are both super fun characters for me. I really love both of their characters. Ronblade, or Lord Ronblade, as he's called in the book, is the Badger Lord of Salamandastron at the time. He's very much like a Badger Lord. Very strong, very powerful, very spiteful towards vermin, and doesn't like knowing that there's these creatures out there that want nothing more than to pillage and destroy and kill and plunder, and just he doesn't like that, and so his goal is to protect the world from that. He has a very interesting history that you learn about through the series or through the book, and he's a fun character to follow as well, especially his dichotomy, I guess, or juxtaposition with Gabool the Wild, who is basically the main villain of this book. Gabool himself, as I mentioned, is a sea rat. He's basically considered the king of the sea rats. He's the one in control of everything on the ocean at that time, kind of, and is very much your classic villain. Not the strongest, he doesn't have the strongest motivations, but he does have a lot of character, and his personality really shines through, and it's very interesting to see his character arc. Besides these 4 main characters that I've given, there's a bunch of other characters that most of them are really fun to follow. There's a couple that are kind of just but for the most part they're really interesting and fun to follow, and their motivations are for the most part really well done. So the story of this book, again, I wrote my own synopsis for this book, and so I will be reading it right off the page. Storm Goldwalker wakes up on a beach without any memories of her past or who she was, but as she travels she makes her way to Redwall Abbey, and with the help of Martin the Warrior and the folks of Redwall, she remembers that her name is Mariel, and that she and her father were captured by Gabool the Wild while bringing a great bell to Lord Ronblade of Salamandastron. Mariel and Dandin set out on an adventure to find and free Joseph, her father, and the rest of the slaves from Gabool, and end his tyrannical reign. It's a well-written story. It's fairly simple to follow. There's a couple different storylines. The primary storyline is that of Mariel and Dandin on their adventure, but there is the storyline of Ronblade and the storyline of the Sea Rats and of Redwall Abbey. So there's a couple different storylines, but for the most part you follow Mariel and Dandon. One of the things that Jacques does so amazingly in all his books is you have all these different storylines. Some of them go off here, some of them go off here, some of them are completely separate, but eventually they all converge, and not necessarily all the characters come and meet up. It's more of the themes and the lessons that are being presented through these stories all line up to present this larger story and to make the whole story make sense. And it's really interesting how he does it, and I really enjoy it. As for the themes of this book, kindness and the desire to help is a big one. Sacrifice is another big one. Justice, not vengeance, is kind of one that it's interesting because he kind of shows it as these characters want vengeance and they're going to get vengeance and vengeance will be had. But at the same time, in a different place, they're promoting justice rather than vengeance. And so it's interesting to see how it ends up working out. Evil destroys evil. That's another theme that is very interesting, and one that he managed to bring in, and one that I don't see many other authors using because it's kind of difficult to successfully present. And then You Get What You Deserve. That's another one that is fairly common in the Redwall series, is lots of times the main character, the good guys, don't end up killing the bad guys die from something that they did, or their acts cause the end results. So it's interesting to see how all of that plays together. As for the world / setting, the world is super enjoyable. Of course, I've talked about this, I love the Redwall series. This one takes place mostly at Redwall Abbey and at Terramort Island, and kind of the journey between Redwall and Terramort, and a little bit at Salamandastron as well. Of course, because it's a journey, we see Mossflower and we see some of the outside world beyond Mossflower, which is really cool and really interesting to see some of that. Of course, as in all the Redwall books, we meet up with a bunch of different groups and societies along the way, but primarily in this book, besides that of the Redwallers and the Salamandastron, we see these Sea Rats and we see their culture and their personalities and the way that they think, and specifically those under the control of Gabool. We see how Gabool acts, we see how he treats those under him, as well as the environment of Terramort Island. So there's kind of this Salamandastron, which is like this military rock that's strong and powerful and good, and then there's this Redwall Abbey that's good and loving and kind and welcoming, and then there's Terramort Island, which is pretty much pure evil, but there's some nuance to that, and it's interesting to see. And then we also see the various ships and captains and crews under Gabool's command. So it's interesting to see the different personalities of this more seafaring tale rather than just the Redwall Abbey, which we see in all of them pretty much. For the uniqueness factor, the magic system of the series, as I've mentioned, is very minuscule in size and scale, and it has a lot to do with the spirits of those who came before, specifically Martin the Warrior and the Badger Lords. They will show up and give advice, and that's kind of the whole magic system. It's very soft, it's very much what can these spirits actually do, how can they present meaning to the story and help move the story forward. One of the interesting things specifically about the magic system in this one is we actually get to see a little bit about how it can bridge the space-time continuum, and that gap between space and time is able to be bridged through dreams. Because of this, it causes some interesting character development that is very necessary to get to the point where we are and to provide that nuance to the characters in their story arcs. Besides that, of course, it's an anthropomorphic fantasy completely without humans, and that adds to the uniqueness of the world. This is just basic Redwall stuff that I say in pretty much all the Redwall reviews. General thoughts. This is a really well-written story with a lot of great things about it. I really like the main characters, like I mentioned. Mariel and Dandon are great characters. Ronblade, it's always interesting to see how the Badger Lords act and how they react to the vermin that usually because of the way that he writes the stories, they have a history with. And so that's super cool to see. The villains in this one are really interesting, not just Gabul, but some of the lesser captains of the Sea Rats and stuff. It's cool to see how they think and how they process and how they go about trying to achieve their own goals and what they think of Gabul's reign. Overall, though, I really like the characters of this story and the themes are really well done. The storyline itself is not my favorite. Of course, it's still good. I still enjoy listening to it as I did this time or reading it, but it's not my favorite of the series, and it used to be. I used to really like Mariel of Redwall, but it wasn't my favorite this time reading it. I didn't enjoy it as much, though I did, of course, still, like I said, I did enjoy the characters. Writing style, Brian Jacques is a great writer. I've said this all before. He's super easy to follow, super easy to understand where he's taking the story, and it's very precise language that he chose for a reason. You can tell that he chose the way he worded the things because it was important to the way that he was telling the story. In this one, there were some slower, boring moments that I kind of was just like, all right, I want to keep going. But then there was also some great, super fun moments in this book where you get some really interesting environments and characters and descriptions, and you get to see some things that you don't get to see in every Redwall book. And so that's really cool to read about and to get this different aspect of the world that you sometimes don't get. Probably my favorite thing about this book, though, is the character arcs, specifically Gabul's. I loved Gabul's character arc in this one. He starts out, I can't say what his character arc is, but it's super cool to see his character arc throughout this one. Overall, my rating for Mariel of Redwall is 3.5 stars. It's not my favorite. I love it. It's Redwall. I love it. But it's definitely not top 5. But I do like Mariel of Redwall, though it's not my favorite. On to the Bellmaker. There's a lot about this that's very similar to Mariel of Redwall. This review should be a little bit shorter, and it will mostly talk about the things that I didn't talk about in the other one. So, again, this is a novel from Redwall, written by Brian Jacques. Genre is anthropomorphic fantasy and high fantasy and whatever other subgenres you want to put it in. Middle grade to young adult is the age range again, leaning towards young adult. The characters, again, we follow Mariel and Dandan, and Joseph is actually a main character in this one, and I really like Joseph. The Ergen Nagru, or Foxwolf, as he's titled himself, I guess, and then Foxwolf's wife, Silvermord. So those are really the main 5 characters. There's a ton of other characters that are very important to the story, and though the main characters are really great, other than Joseph, I actually really like most of the side characters a lot better, specifically Finbar Galedeep, who is an otter. I guess I should mention this. Joseph is a mouse, Ergen Nagru is a fox, and then Silvermord is a fox. Joseph, seeing his character in this one and his character arc is one of my favorite aspects of this book. It's very, very cool to see the way he thinks. He's an older mouse at this point. He's not, Mariel and Dandan are in the prime of their life, but Joseph, being Mariel's father, is quite a bit older. And so it's interesting to see how he acts and how he thinks as that older mentor father figure type character. Again, I wrote my own synopsis for this, and I will quickly read that. When Joseph the Bellmaker is visited by Martin the Warrior and instructed to go on a quest, he cannot refuse, and so, with a group of other Redwallers, he goes off on an adventure, following the instructions given by Martin. Elsewhere in the world, Mariel and Dandan find themselves in the position of opposing the tyranny of Ergen Nagru, the Foxwolf, and his wife Silvermord. They are terrorizing the lands that once belonged to Gale Squirrel King, and have taken over Castle Floret. The story follows the characters through many journeys and trials on land and on sea. So, as I mentioned in that very last sentence, land and sea. So you really see Mariel and Dandan's story and the Foxwolf storyline, and that whole Castle Floret part is the on-land part. But then you get to see Joseph's storyline and that his group of Redwallers, the quest part aspect of it. It ends up on land as well, but they also take a sea voyage, and the whole sea voyage part is super interesting, super cool. Finbar Galedeep is a great character and one that I really, really love. Otters are one of my favorite creatures, so of course I really love when they show up in the Redwall books. The themes of this one are opposed tyranny, which is a pretty common one for the Redwall series. These are, of course, besides the do-right type themes that are in all of the books. Your upbringing does not define you, the choices you make do. That's a big theme, and one that I really love seeing, because through this theme, or rather through the perspective of the Redwallers, you see this theme come out, and it's really reinforced and it's really interesting to see. Trust in those around you. Distrust causes issues. This is basically seen through the eyes of the villains in this one, the fox wolf and his wife. And then listen to wise counsel. This is one that's kind of, you don't realize that it's there, but it is. It's very much an important part of this story, because by not listening to the council, that's what caused all the issues. World/setting. We talked about this extensively for Mariel of Redwall, so I will kind of just be going through it pretty rapidly. Of course, I love the world. We see a different part of the world in this one through the sea and through Southsward, which is kind of very similar to Mossflower, but it has a very different feel from Mossflower. And then we see the ocean, and seeing the ocean is really cool. We get to meet sharks, and we get to have to deal with that, and there's quite a bit of world building just with how the ocean is designed, and that's super cool to see. Uniqueness factor, again, I already talked about it in the Mariel of Redwall part. This one doesn't have a whole lot that adds to it like the last one did with the dreams and everything. This one is mostly just Martin talking and giving advice or giving the quest, kind of. But the use of poetry in this one, the messages that are given are almost exclusively given in poetry, and that's really interesting and really well done in this book specifically. General thoughts. There is a fair amount about this story specifically that seems a bit repetitive and boring, but for some reason the execution of the story is one of my favorites. The weird thing is that I remember my brothers thinking the Bellmaker was boring, thinking it was slow, and they just didn't enjoy it that much. And I feel like I used to think that way as well, or maybe I just thought that way because my brothers thought that way, and so that was the way that I was supposed to think. But after rereading this one, I really like this one a lot more than Mariel of Redwall, which Mariel of Redwall used to be one of my favorites, but this reread kind of changed that all. Writing style, again, it's easy to follow, precise writing. There's a lot going on, but it's never hard to understand because all the different storylines are so distinct from each other. It's very easy to follow them, and that's really all I have to say about this one because it's Redwall and so much of it is very similar to Mariel of Redwall. So my rating for this one I think is probably about 4 stars, maybe 4.25. So that is that for my review of Mariel of Redwall and The Bellmaker by Brian Jacques. Thanks for watching, guys. Please, if you enjoyed this video, please like the video and comment down below. Especially if you've read any of the Redwall series, let me know what you think of the Redwall series. Subscribe to An Erudite Adventure if you haven't already. We try and post videos every Monday and Thursday, and you can follow us on Instagram, though we're not terribly active there. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay well.